So I am walking from Kasumigaseki again. I usually take this route when I'm on the way to FCCJ, Foreign Correspondence Club of Japan, FCC. I'm gonna have a book interview there. So it's autumn in Japan. I'm in the Hibiya Park and it's a beautiful scenery here. Yeah, the leaves are turning to yellow, red, what the Japanese call koyo, and the Japanese really love to see the change of colors on the trees. And for example, Kyoto is very famous for that, and many people flock to Kyoto to admire the changing of the color. Talking about change, there has been a change in American politics, and Donald Trump is finally out of office, or he's supposed to be, but he doesn't admit it. Although reportedly Melania Trump kindly suggests to her husband to admit it in a manly manner, and no sexism intended there. And come out of the closet, come out of the White House. So there has been this change, and it's one thing that I admire about the United States. There's this dynamic of constant clash between different ideas, but people eventually come to compromise, and that's called democracy. However, in this country, here in Tokyo, I'm walking again, there's not such a thing as a dynamic change of governance, because the LDP has ruled Japan for most of the time after 1955, and it appears that the Japanese people at large, they like to portray themselves as supporting the LDP because they believe that that's a majority, and or in Japanese word, futsu, normal. So I love this country, and I have written about some really, really wonderful aspects of Japanese culture. Like I have written my book of Ikigai, but at the same time I do feel that this adherence to normalcy, this sense of belonging to a majority, is something that we might be advised to discard. So this is a beautiful part of Hibiya Park, this Western Garden. Really classic, old school, type of garden design. And it is a symbol of Japan's modernization and westernization. So these are the government offices, Ministry of Welfare, Ministry of Industry, and so because Japanese people tend to assume that there's this high level of consensus between them, and this assumption of a high level of consensus has resulted in many good cultural icons, like the omakase is where you just sit at a restaurant and you can ask the master, the chef, to do an omakase, and on that word you don't have to do anything. Maybe you order some beer, sake, wine, tea, but otherwise you don't have to do any ordering. There's no this agony of reading the menu and choosing from them. It's a cognitively loaded task, and you are supposed to be relaxing in a restaurant, and if you cannot relax in a restaurant, what is the point of it? Sometimes you go to a restaurant and you take a look at the menu for a few minutes, and when you decide it, the waiter is not there, so you have to wait for a few extra minutes, and so it's quite possible that before you have your first bite, time like 50 minutes have passed, which is a really significant wait if you are hungry. But in a omakase Japanese restaurant, you don't have to do that. You just have to sit at the table, or more typically at the counter, and you can just wait for the food to arrive. The reason you can do that is because there is this assumption of high consensus. Because you kind of assume that if a customer comes in a restaurant, what he or she would prefer food-wise would be pretty much predictable. You wouldn't have to ask what he or she prefers before serving. So whether this is a Imperial Palace Waters, it's a remnant feature from the era of samurai. That's where the emperor lives now, but that's where the shogun used to reside during the Edo era, which lasted for about 260 years. So this is a very historically charged part of Tokyo. So where was I? Yeah, so the whole premise of omakase restaurant is that you don't have to ask the customers too much about what they would prefer. By the way, this is the Daiichi Seimei building. This is the GHQ, where the GHQ was located. General MacArthur was here. So this is also a very historic place. And if you see the proximity to the Imperial Palace, you understand why the GHQ, General MacArthur, chose this location for their headquarters just after the Second World War. Anyway, so the assumption of high consensus has led to many great things like the omakase. But at the same time, it has burdened Japan with a stagnant political system where most of the time there won't be a change of government, which I think is necessary for democracies to work, because if you are out of the government, when you become an opposition, you can nurture your faculty for critically assessing things, right? And that's good for you. But if you stay in the government forever, then you gradually lose your sense of critical thinking. The opposite can be said about opposition. If you are permanently in opposition, then you lose this faculty for taking responsibility, because all you do tend to be criticizing the government policy, not really be in the spot and doing it yourself and taking all the responsibility. So this change of government, this change of the ruling and opposition parties is, I think, a really necessary metabolism in any democracy. But because of the high consensus in Japan, there has been relatively few changes of government in this country. So this assumption of high consensus is a double-edged sword. And for me, I'm not really a typical member of this society, so I always had this problem of not feeling to belong to the majority of the society, especially, for example, when it comes to comedy. I've known in Japan as somebody who is criticizing the Japanese comedy, which is totally lacking political satire. So that's my minority opinion, but that's an opinion. But in this country, because the peer pressure to become one with the majority is so strong, a person like myself tend to have a really hard time making one's keys or making any noise. So anyway, so that's the Imperial Palace, and FCCJ is in this building, the Foreign Correspondence Club of Japan. So that's where I'm going to have my book interview. So I stop my recording here. So have a nice day.